Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lamont Weber, and I have the extraordinary privilege to be with a homeopathic physician. Is that how you say it?
Sure, or homeopath also works.
Homeopath?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my thing. Who, Ananda More, who's coming to us from Toronto, I believe.
Yes.
Who is the producer, director, and creator of an award-winning film that is truly transformational, because it has opened my eyes and has opened the eyes of people who have watched it, who I've spoken to, as to how homeopathy can really take us through these times when especially vaccination has become such a buzzword. And vaccination, you will find out, means something entirely different. But I thought we could start, Ananda, by watching the trailer. Would that be okay?
That would be wonderful. Thanks, Alan.
Good. So I'm just going to put it on share screen and bring us there a moment. And so here we go. And here it is.
Claims require extraordinary evidence. And if there ever is an extraordinary claim, it's homeopathy.
Homeopathic medicine is highly controversial, eliciting extreme emotions, from pure hatred to deep conviction in its capacity to heal. My name's Ananda More, and I was concerned about how poorly I was fact-checked and how things that I had said were published incorrectly.
No, it's a piece of long-form literary journalism, which is how the genre operates.
She was not a concerned mother, but a reporter. I just felt so betrayed. I felt so manipulated.
Hey, I want to talk about the evidence and the science.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff to talk about.
With so much at stake, I'm going to investigate the evidence, science, and use of homeopathy in the real world.
We get 200, 250 cancer cases. How many clinics in the world get that many?
This is my grandmother, and she was discharged from the hospital in that condition. She might not live just 2-3 hours more. So after that, Baron's medicine started. She started recovering, and miraculously I saw one day she's sitting there watching the television itself.
The interventions in Cuba were not contrived experiments. These were interventions in the real world where people were becoming unwell and dying.
She's in the ward in TPC hospital. I don't know for how long she's been there. We'll go there and find out. But she's so thin that she can't sustain vomiting and diarrhea. She just can't. It's impossible.
So they kind of become self-delusional. The arguments that they use are scientifically bankrupt.
The fact of the matter is that several researchers have done very sophisticated assays to demonstrate that that specific metal is in that specific remedy that started from that source material.
We're not trying to fight conventional medicine. We're trying to show that homeopathy is a very useful adjunct.
The current environment is viciously anti-homeopathy. But is the public narrative based on accurate science and reporting, or special interests and hearsay?
And unfortunately, there's a lot of this out there. Nonsense seems to be gaining on science.
That is what I mean when I say my treatment won't kill you. Their treatment might.
There we go. You know, I'm not sure. Did that technically malfunction or something?
I think it did on my end. It was really choppy. But if people want to watch the trailer, they can go to.
Oh wait. There's something still going on. Oh, sorry. One simple trick. Let me just get this over.
Plastic surgeon Stephen Gundry.
Oh boy, what's going on here? Sorry about that.
No problem.
This,
So if I was
hello?
just going to say, hi, are we, we're good?
Have to, yeah, there we go. We're back.
So I was just going to say it was a little choppy on my end, and it froze for a little bit.
Yeah.
But if people want to go and watch the trailer, if they had problems seeing it, they can go to watch.magicpillsmovie.com, and the trailer is right there.
Oh, good, good, yeah, and we'll put the link in the description to the interview, and also in the article that will accompany this, because I was so moved by this movie, and I can see how it won so many awards. What could you tell us what led you to go and make the movie in the first place?
I guess I was practicing homeopathy. It was early on in my career, and homeopathy is very difficult. It's a bit of an art. And I was thinking to myself a little bit, well, if this is placebo, why am I working so hard? I'm sure there could be easier ways to make placebo work. And it was some self-doubt, I guess, going on. But along with that, I have a bookstore and a homeopathic shop and clinic, and we attend these conferences to sell books. And I was at one of these conferences when Dr. Gustavo Bracho, he's in the film, and he's an immunologist and vaccine expert, actually. He's one of the world's most renowned vaccine adjuvant experts. He came and presented how in Cuba, the Finley Institute stopped an epidemic of this disease called leptospirosis in 2 weeks using homeopathy in Cuba. Now, this should be front page news, and it was done by a pharmaceutical company, to blow your mind even further. And I thought, no one is ever going to hear about this. It's suppressed. Medical journals don't want to publish it. They sent it to a bunch of medical journals, and they all responded with, it's interesting, but it's not right for our audience. One journal responded with, could you please get a signature from all 2.5 million people involved in the study? And things that were unheard of for them. And these are scientists who are published, their work is published regularly. So I thought there has to be some way to get this out into the world, that people will hear that this is going on and that we do have options. So that's where the idea of making a film came.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. Yeah, it really, could you tell us about how you, because that was a very moving episode. Have you contacted at all any of the people here in Canada with regard to the coronavirus and the possible application of homeopathy in the vaccine? Because it would be a lot safer than the traditional allopathic vaccines, because the original SARS-1 vaccine that was produced in 2009, it caused brain damage in infants. And now they're going to the SARS-2 vaccine. Who knows what that's going to do?
Well, they've really come after homeopathy. We're not allowed, we're registered health professionals in Ontario, and we're not allowed to discuss that we can treat anything. We're not allowed to talk about vaccines. And like I have family working for Health Canada. It's there's no interest, and I think in my mind there's another agenda there. They really don't want a safe, affordable alternative to any medical act, I guess. And right now in the US, they're even working to make homeopathy illegal. In Australia, they've managed to close down all the homeopathic hospitals. It's been over the last few years that homeopathy is becoming demonized. They say that it's dangerous because it doesn't work. They say it's unscientific, even though the medical literature and the scientific literature says otherwise. And they've very much painted a very specific narrative of how they want the public to view homeopathy. So reaching out and saying we have a solution. They've done it they've used my film, they've tried to do it in Hong Kong, they've tried to do it in Tanzania, they've worked, not in Tanzania, in Kenya. They have approached the US as well in terms of trying to bring light and shed light that homeopathy could make a difference with this epidemic. But they don't really want to listen to us.
That's so unfortunate. Is there any way that, to any open-minded person who watches your film, I would say, if you sit down and watch it and you look at the experience in Cuba, how could you not take that as a real experience that could be replicated with the coronavirus?
Yeah.
Seriously.
And in fact, it has been replicated. They've replicated it over 7 times in Cuba itself. Similar work has been done in Brazil, in India. And right now, India as a nation has decided that they have a Ministry of Natural Medicine called the Ministry of Ayush. And it's an acronym, and the H stands for homeopathy at the end. And they've declared the homeopathic remedy Arsenicum album 30C as the preventative for corona. And they've distributed it very, very widely in India. And it's quite impressive that India has very few cases per capita of COVID. People don't understand why. Cuba has done something similar. They created a remedy for acute viral infection. So it includes COVID, but it also includes dengue and other things other viruses that they're dealing with in the country. And the rates in Cuba are almost at 0. So it's interesting that we even have some correlatory data coming out right now in the countries that have used homeopathy to address corona. So it's out there, but countries like Canada and the US and your mainstream Western countries are not interested. I think the same way they weren't interested, or they're skewing the science around hydrochloroquine, for example.
Yeah, this makes me think that there might be hidden agendas that are at work here that you would not have, that there seems to be so much pressure to shut down homeopathy, and yet it has had so much success. And where you have something like the coronavirus, where there seem to be many vested interests from the vaccination industry, from bioweapons labs, where there's evidence that there may have been involvement from interests like Bill and Melinda Gates from the Rockefeller Foundation. There was a Harvard professor who was indicted last week by the US Department of Justice for his work in transferring a weaponized version of the COVID-19 or the coronavirus to a level 4 lab in Wuhan, China. I was struck. I just like to mention this aspect, and it might seem strange to you, but I saw that you really went in this film and you sought out the most powerful critics of homeopathy, and you went at them head on. And I said, what are you doing? For example, the scientist, the critic, the homeopathic critic at McGill, who's a hardcore skeptic. Why did you go and seek out the most hardcore skeptics that you could find? I thought that was extraordinary.
I really wanted to get their perspective, and I wanted to find out. I actually went there open-minded, wanting to find out, am I missing something? Is there something I don't understand? Is there something I'm not seeing? Can you really challenge the research that I'm bringing to you? And they're completely unable to do that. So you're talking about Joe Schwartz at the University of McGill, who's a professor of chemistry. And he's a fascinating individual, I have to say. But I think, yeah, like I did go in there with respect, really wanting to hear the perspective. And it was kind of disappointing to see that, you know, he's one of the loudest critics of homeopathy. I don't know if you hear about him much in Vancouver, but he's got his own radio show. He's in the Montreal Gazette all the time. He's got a lot of books and very popular YouTube videos. And he claims to be an expert on the topic. But when I brought him all this research and all the stories we had shown in the film, he had nothing to say except for, well, that's not possible. That can't be. And how do you follow up on that? Like, it's ignorant. It's also a huge confirmation bias issue. I think they live they've created a world view for themselves that is very materialistic, very based in what we can see visually, chemically. And if it's working on a level beyond that, then it's impossible and it rips their world apart, regardless of the evidence. So it just can't be. But I thought it was really important to get that perspective because I didn't want to make a propaganda film. I wanted to be able to speak to the average audience who has been exposed to the mainstream narrative that there's no way that homeopathy could possibly work. It's completely unscientific. To say, hey, look, you know, this is the perspective and I know what they're saying. I've heard these chemists and scientists and professional skeptics and their point of view. Here I am presenting it again. But have you looked at this other perspective? And here's maybe what they're missing. So it was to encourage people to maybe, I don't expect everyone to come out of the film convinced that homeopathy works, but at least to think that it's worth investigation and worth a second look. And it shouldn't be so easily dismissed.
Well, you know, from my point of view, I mean, his testimony was a red flag for me as to his skepticism. And maybe I have very special case here because he said, well, this is like Uri Geller bending spoons. Now, Uri Geller has bent a spoon in my presence because I was at Stanford Research Institute and Uri Geller was a test subject with Hal Puthoff and Russ Targ on remote viewing. And Uri Geller was also an author, a fellow author at G.P. Putnam's and Sons. And at one of the author parties, I was there, and Uri Geller we were in a party with, you know, there are about 6 or 7 of us authors there, and Uri Geller came in, and he bent spoons for all of us, and he read our minds. So those of us who are in this area of parapsychology know that there's real science behind telepathy, telekinesis, and there's a solid science that has been studied at Stanford Research Institute, that has been published in peer-reviewed journals. And for him to use that example to try and dismiss homeopathy, to me showed that he's not a scientist at all, but rather he is a propagandist.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? I mean, he is really a propagandist. He is not a scientist.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think there's a whole group of people who like to call themselves skeptics. And the way they call us pseudoscientists, we call them pseudo-skeptics, because their skepticism doesn't feel genuine. And you can trace and even look at where their funding is coming from for their organizations. And sometimes they hide it really well, and you get, you know, like the Center for Skeptical Inquiry that has a couple hundred members and yet has budgets of millions and millions of dollars. And where is this money coming from for their work? But with Joe Schwartz, he's funded by the Trottier Foundation. And Trottier made his money from the cell phone industry and from the pharmaceutical industry. So there's a clear agenda there in my mind. They're being paid to be to raise doubts and make people feel very uncomfortable in pursuing these other lines of thought. So I think they're paid to do this. I'm going to pour myself some water.
Yeah.
So
and so that's, with his testimony, when I watched it in the film, is when I saw that your film was really courageous, because you busted him. I mean, he came out with propaganda, because if his best argument was that he had to bust Uri Geller, who has been verified by Stanford Research Institute in journals. I mean, the man's science is a joke. Really.
And that leads us to the whole idea of scientism and bias in science. We have very little, I think today, very little objective work being done in mainstream science.
But you know, there is such a polarization today around the issue of vaccinations and the coronavirus, and the issue of whether there should be mandatory vaccinations around the coronavirus. And you being a public advocate of homeopathy, which an award-winning film, don't you think that it would be worthwhile to start an initiative of communication with public health authorities here in Canada, public health authorities in receptive countries, to begin to get the word out? Because at best, we have just ill-informed national, provincial, and world public health authorities. at worst, we have brainwashed or ill-willed public health authorities who are on a depopulation agenda. That's what we learned from some testimony about secret meetings that occurred in 2009 at the Rockefeller Foundation between David Rockefeller and Bill Gates, where they came up with a plan to reduce the world population from 7 billion down to 1 billion, and created a document which I just saw, Operation Lockstep, from 2010 to 2020. We're living in Operation Lockstep, and the kill shot is the vaccinations. As soon as I saw your film, I said, oh, this is a way out of Operation Lockstep. And so would it not be good to surface and begin to approach public health authorities with your film and with written testimony, approach parliamentary committees, receptive people to say, look, here is evidence, here are alternatives because of the dangers that are involved in allopathic vaccinations.
Yeah, I guess I've been lazy and have left it to the organizations and associations that have picked up the film to do just that. But I think you're right. And I think I would need some help and guidance on how to take that next step. But I am open to that.
No.
But I do think it's a combination of those two things. There's people who are ill-willed and there's an agenda. And then there's people who are ignorant. But that's where it feels like this insurmountable step. There's over the last 2 years, the FDA really set out to make homeopathy illegal. And I find it hard to think that it's coincidental with what we're seeing now. They put out a draft guidance document 2 years ago, basically stating that homeopathy needed to go through the new drug application process. Even though homeopathic remedies were considered safe, they call it GRAS, generally regarded as safe, and became part of the FDA from its inception because the senator who pushed the idea of the FDA was himself a homeopath. So it's very strange that suddenly they come out with this document, which would basically make homeopathy illegal in the US. And the homeopathic community fought them very hard on this. The comment that we managed to stop them and delay them, but the comment period on the second draft guidance document closed 2 weeks ago. And now we're waiting to hear what's going to happen. And I was involved with this group called Americans for Homeopathy Choice, which did go to, they did go to a lot of government members. They found the people who were receptive to homeopathy. They introduced all these ideas to them, but they're also being very cautious and sensitive around the vaccine issue because it's so polarizing, and most politicians are terrified to touch that issue or to touch the anti-vaccine side. So it's tricky, but I think it's absolutely worthwhile. So I was going after the let's do the grassroots movement, let's get people asking for it, demanding it. Let's get the average person to know what homeopathy is, because I think here in Canada, very few people really recognize what homeopathy is, and they confuse it with herbs and other forms of alternative medicine. But I would, if you can guide me, or you know people to guide me in the right direction, I'd be really happy to work towards that.
Well, it occurs to me that you could put together like a round table or a committee or a group of people who would be like a a committee that would be concerned and could act like an information committee around homeopathy and the coronavirus to bring the public health benefits. See, I have a certificate in community health from the Harvard School of Public Health. And that's the perspective that I'm coming from. I think that homeopathy is a great benefit from a public health point of view. That's my perspective. That's what I learned from that film. Boom. I used to, in the 1990s, I was an administrator of an award-winning community health center at the Texas-Mexican border. We saw 90,000 patient encounters a year. I administered 20 physicians and 120 nurses. So, and it was an allopathic, but I can see how homeopathy would have been, could have been used. Now, especially in the vaccination area. Now, in the SARS-2 or coronavirus, it seems to me that that if we could get a group that could begin to communicate with some of the public health officials, at the Dr. Tam level, at the PMO level, the Prime Minister's Office level, and make our concerns known about the vaccinations. There's a video that I watched. There's a physician, a Canadian physician, just made a very extensive statement that she's extremely concerned because Canada has contracted for a COVID-19 vaccine that's made in China. Mm-hmm. And where we know that the safety standards may be, compromised or less than desirable. So I'm just saying, I would be willing, because of my background and my commitment in this area, to be part of such a committee. We could look at who should be members of it, all on a volunteer basis, on a pro bono basis of our commitment to public health. But I'm just sort of talking out loud off the back of an envelope here. What are your thoughts?
I think we have to try, and I think there's a commitment to that. I do see the obstacles in the way, which is the pharmaceutical lobby and the pharmaceutical industry, because we're such a massive threat to them, where their biggest profit and future profits, as they're losing patents on so many of their drugs, their only real area of growth is vaccines. So you can see how threatening homeopathy can be to a movement like that. It feels like David versus Goliath, but David needs to fight, right? And maybe David stands a chance.
Yeah. And, so I'm thinking that in that context, your film would be a very good educational tool where one could sponsor online conferences where you could have online showings of it, or you send it out and then people could watch it overnight or something, and then you would have discussions afterward. Because I think that the film basically opens minds, because you were brave enough to go to real critics, and then you had real nation states evidence, like the Cuban case, that can't be denied. I mean, that is such powerful data coming from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just a thought that I have, because I think that there's no independent input coming in other than the lobbyists from the vaccine industry that are probably inputting into public health here at that level in Canada. And we could do it at the provincial level. I know here in BC, we could access here in BC, and you probably could access in there in Ontario, and perhaps have a group of somewhere between half dozen and a dozen people who are familiar and have a background and have a dedication to outreach, maybe a geographical balance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just talking out loud here. Maybe you have a network. I know that I just became an affiliate with your film. Maybe you have affiliates with your film. I'm just talking out.
Well, let's
out
reach
loud.
out to our, let's, I think we should set up a time to sit and brainstorm and set up next steps.
Yeah, good. Well, talk to us more about homeopathy. How does it work? What is it? Where did it get started? How is it different from allopathic medicine? Why does it work? Why are the doctors so afraid of it? Talk to us about it.
Right. Well, some of those questions I can approximate, as in why does it work and how does it work? We're not 100% sure. But to begin with, homeopathy is over 200 years old. It's medical science developed in Germany by a physician named Samuel Hahnemann. But the foundations of homeopathy are much, much, much older. You can see Hippocrates and Paracelsus and even different traditional medical, different medical traditions, indigenous medical traditions that have discovered that what is the main tenet of homeopathy, which is like cures like. And that's what homeopathy means. Homeo is similar and pathy is disease or suffering. And the term allopathy, which we use for conventional medicine, is the opposite. Allo is opposite, and allopathy is about suppressing and blocking. So we have things like antibiotics, antihistamines, and so on, anti. So the idea of homeopathy is that it works with your body. It provides the information to your immune system so that it can activate, do the work itself, and bring your system to a place of homeostasis or balance. And balance is a dynamic thing. It comes and goes, it moves, and it's the ability of your immune system and your, what we call the vital force, but your energetic system to be able to respond appropriately in order to create balance. Now, what makes homeopathy very controversial is this notion of dilution. And to explain what we do is we'll take a little bit of I dropped out. I just came back. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, we're here. Let's get the gallery view. sometimes, you know, you can tell that there's resistance in the deep state against homeopathy, because you were explaining how it works, and whether it's the artificial intelligence behind the internet or one of their employees made sure that, so you might even start over if that's okay.
Sure, and this isn't the first time it's happened when I'm explaining this, which is interesting. It happened last week. So what we do with homeopathic medicine is that we dilute and we put our remedies through something called succussion. So if you just dilute the product, it doesn't do anything, but we have to succuss it, which is this process of shaking it. And I'll explain why in a moment. But what we do is, let's say you make a tincture of a plant, and I used chamomile as an example. And from that tincture, you take 1 drop and you add 99 drops of water to it, and you shake it up. And then you get your next test tube, and you have 1 drop, or your next vial, 99 drops of water, and you do this again. And we do this, we can do it hundreds or thousands of times even, sometimes 5, sometimes 3, but there's a whole gamut. And what happens is, once you've done it over 12 times, according to Avogadro's law, there should be none of the original source material left in your dilution. And so therefore, from a conventional perspective, there's no source material, so it can't do anything chemically in your body, so therefore it's impossible that it works. But what we've discovered is that succussion, which when Hahnemann used to do it, he would take his vial of remedy and he would slam it against his Bible, and he found that 100 times was the ideal amount of times to do that. And what that causes, very interestingly, is very, very high temperatures in that vial for split seconds. I'm just going to turn this off. It causes nanobubbles to form in that water. It creates it sloughs off nanoparticles of silica from the glass, and silica is a conductor. And perhaps it creates quantum domains within that solution. So there's a lot going on, and we believe that energetically something is being formed in that water, and that water is starting to hold the information of that original substance. Now, we show in the film how this biochemist this chemical engineer rather, in India named Dr. Jayesh Ballare, who works at IIT Bombay, Mumbai, he discovered, he's one of the only people on the planet that has 24-hour access to an electron microscope. Like, he has an electron microscope basically in his lab in his office. And he discovered that homeopathic remedies contain nanoparticles of source material, and even very, very high potencies. So we can no longer say that there is no source material in what we're using. So that blows that argument out of the water. And in fact, that work has been replicated in labs all over the world, at least a dozen so far. And they started with minerals, because it's much easier to identify source material of a mineral than it is of a plant or something organic. And now they've moved on to organic substances. But yeah, I feel like I'm going in a few directions at once. It's such a big topic. So we don't know how homeopathy works. We can now, through a lot of research and basic science, we can actually differentiate a control substance to a homeopathic substance. So there's polar dyes, which respond to electromagnetic fields in water, or in a substance rather, in a solute. Homeopathic remedies, the polar dyes respond in homeopathic remedies. They don't respond in controls. There are people now who say they can measure electromagnetic fields off of our remedies that they can't do in controls. We have thousands of laboratory basic research on things like plants, on cell lines, that show homeopathy is effective way beyond placebo. So we don't know the mechanism as of yet as to how it works, but we can see over and over again that it does. And perhaps it's communicating on a quantum level, perhaps it is chemical with the nanoparticles, and perhaps it's something in between. We don't know.
What are some of the leading hypotheses or theories as to how it works?
Mm-hmm. So there is a physicist named Dr. Alex Tournier. He's French, he's working in Germany right now, and he believes that what we're looking at is possibly quantum domains. And not being a physicist of that caliber, I don't completely understand how that works. But the idea is that these quantum domains are formed, and what they do is they self-replicate. So that's another thing that's a little bit threatening, I think, to the pharmaceutical industry, is if you have a remedy that can just make more and more and more and more, and it doesn't cost very much money to keep producing it, but that signal keeps self-replicating. And he believes that quantum domains would fulfill certain things that are required to explain how homeopathy works, because we put our liquids on pellets and the liquid evaporates, and yet the pellet still holds the information. So it has to be something that is stable and remains through evaporation. And yeah, it's such a complex field, but I think that's one of the winning arguments right now. The other is that the nanoparticles are actually either creating nanobubbles within the water, so that the nanoparticles have a charge, and then the water molecules form around those bubbles, around those molecules with opposite charges, creating very interesting patterns, and maybe that's how it's communicating with our system. So those are two of the leading hypotheses right now.
Yeah, well, with such advanced theoretical work being done to explain how it works, how can it be that regulatory bodies are taking inimical action against homeopathy?
Well, we know that a lot of these regulatory bodies actually work hand in hand with the pharmaceutical and the medical industries.
I see.
I think a lot of our regulatory bodies are very biased. If you look at the FDA, it's like a rotating door between people working at the FDA and people working at pharmaceutical companies. And their money comes from the pharmaceutical industry because they receive money for every drug that goes through the drug approval process. That's their bread and butter. So it's very tricky, very, very tricky, because of this dynamic that's been set up politically and financially.
I see. Now, speaking as a homeopath, what is the typical homeopathic patient? Are they patients or clients? And how are they treated? For example, if I walked into your store, I'm not, let's say I had a particular ailment, how would I present my ailment, and how would I be treated?
Oh, I love that you asked that question, because you're the first person to ask me that in this context. Homeopathy is very holistic. So it kind of depends if it's an acute or a chronic, but what we're looking for is a complete symptom. So if someone comes in with a flu, we're going to ask them all the presenting symptoms on a physical level, on an emotional level, and is there anything strange going on as well? Because 10 people could come in with the exact same bug, all present a little differently, and will all respond to a different remedy. So, I'd look at let's say you're sneezing, you have a runny nose, a fever, nausea, I'd look at all these details. What's your thirst like? Are you restless? Are you, do you not want to move? What hurts? What doesn't hurt? I'd try to get all those symptoms together. How are you feeling emotionally? And for an acute like that, it could take 15, 20 minutes. And then I would look for the remedy that fits, that has all those symptoms as close as possible within the symptom picture of that substance. And I would give you that substance. If you're coming more with a chronic ailment, then we look at what we call constitutional prescribing, where for me it takes 2 hours. I know other practitioners take about an hour with their patients. But we're looking at the entire history of the person and to understand their stresses, how they've responded to those stresses in life, how they've compensated, what are their patterns, how they perceive the world around them, along with all the physical aspects that are happening. So it feels, I think, like going to a psychologist or to a counselor, because we want to hear your life story. We want to hear how you reacted, how it affected you. And for us, every homeopathic remedy has that deep level of psychological, emotional, spiritual affinities. And so we go that way. And, you know, I think the question coming from that is, how do you know what those affinities are for a homeopathic remedy? And Samuel Hahnemann, 250 years ago, he started doing what's called provings. So healthy people take the remedies in order to produce symptoms, and we observe what the symptoms are, write them down, and see how many people have these symptoms, how strong are they. Also, we look for cured symptoms, and we start to collect a materia medica on every remedy. We also know our remedies through their, like, the first remedies were all allopathic drugs in those days, and also poisons, because we know what they do to the body and how people react to them, so we can use them. We know what the symptom base is of that substance.
Now, you used a couple of words that,
sorry,
that kind of sparked my interest.
Okay.
I started out as a professional with a law degree, and then at one point I got a degree as a psychotherapist. So my question is this: mental health, depression, schizophrenia, you know, the allopaths, the psychiatrists, you know, SSRIs, they use all kind of antidepressants. Do allopaths treat mental health? Do you treat what would be diagnosed as depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, typical mental illnesses?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We do work with those conditions. And, you know, I think they're becoming more common than rare with all the stresses in our society right now. And I think we have to stop looking at them, a lot of them, as diseases, and start looking at, like, why are people responding this way and what's going on. But yeah, we do work with a lot of that. I have a lot of patients with depression, anxiety disorders, bipolar, all those kinds of things. I work with all of that. And it's so different. It's such a different model than the allopathic, let's give you a drug to try to regulate your brain chemistry. I think we need to go deeper, and this is where therapy and psychology can be so powerful and works so beautifully with homeopathy. We do have a couple of therapists at our clinic, and I've worked very closely with some of them with our patients. yeah, we have for we got to get to the source of why people are dealing with these problems and imbalances, and what can be done to support them. That doesn't involve putting them on debilitating medication, or as we know with SSRIs, most of them haven't been shown to be effective beyond placebo, and yet we're still using them. I have seen patients where they've really helped, but they have a lot of side effects and a lot of things that come with them. And we're also telling people that it's not okay for them to feel and think the way they're thinking and feeling, and that it's a disease, rather than working with them so that they can resolve those issues for themselves.
So, in your judgment, then, is how does homeopathy compare to psychiatry and psychiatric medications in terms of efficacy of dealing with mental health issues? I mean, that's a crucial question in today's world, like you point out.
I can't say that I'd have to do some research. I don't have any medical literature that I know of off the top of my mind. But in part of making this film, I got invited to this incredible debate between a doctor in Montreal called Dr. Andre Sain and one of the most powerful skeptics named a doctor named Stephen Novella, who runs the New England Skeptic Society. And this debate happened in a hospital, and most of the people there were psychiatrists, which was fascinating. And these psychiatrists had come because they feel that they don't really have any effective tools in their toolbox to help people with mental health. And I heard them saying this over and over, that their medications, not only do they feel they're not effective, they don't have any other options to work with, and that they're hurting people. So though I do know people who've done very well on their medications, I recognize that these professionals feel a little bit impotent when it comes to working with their patients. So I think their homeopathy could be an alternative and can work beautifully with other forms of therapy and counseling. I'm sorry, I don't have any direct response or any relevant science that I can bring to the table on that question.
But that is a relevant question. It seems that homeopathy has some benefits in the mental health area, is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see it daily with my patients, but I don't know what research has been done in that area.
That is there. You don't know of any published or ongoing studies comparing allopathic treatment versus homeopathic treatment
in that area. I mean, we do have some excellent studies in ADHD.
Yeah.
Where there was this one study done by a Dr. Heiner Fry, who's a pediatrician and was a pediatric oncologist in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And he started using homeopathy. His colleagues at the hospital were very skeptical and thought he was ridiculous. And so he suggested that they do a study together to test the results of homeopathy with ADHD. And so his colleagues created a very, very rigorous study, which involved even like
Oh, hi.
Hi, I switched to my phone because Zoom won't let me in anymore on my computer.
Yeah, because you were getting specific there scientifically, and the controllers were becoming worried.
So that's the first. This has never happened to me before, and Zoom will just not open.
You know, I every day I start discovering more and more areas of control, that more and more dimensions of control. That's all I can say. I mean, this pandemic has exposed more and more dimensions of control. That's all I can say. But I, you know, as a trained graduate psychotherapist, I was never educated or told of the possible application of homeopathy to mental health at all.
No, of course not. We're not, you know, when I first learned about homeopathy in university, and it was taught in a witchcraft and the occult class.
That's amazing.
And the way that was taught, I came out of that class going, who is stupid enough to believe that homeopathy could actually work? And I was very, very skeptical until I had my own personal experience with it. But no, you will no longer learn about homeopathy in a mainstream medical program of any kind.
You know, and because the meme that's out there is that alternative medicine is becoming more and more acceptable and more you know, part of medical and wellness, because wellness is now the goal, and alternative medicine is part of wellness methodologies.
Except at the same time, I think as we're seeing more and more public acceptance, and even more acceptance from individual medical practitioners, the push against it is becoming very strong. So, you know, Google has anything on natural medicine that is positive, it downgrades it, so you almost cannot find it on Google. They've removed a lot of the top websites that were used for people researching natural medicine, like Dr. Mercola or Green Med Info. All of those have been derated, and you're not going to find them on Google. The same thing has happened on Facebook, on YouTube. We see that people talking about natural alternatives are being censored. So yeah, it's becoming and as well, the mainstream media will no longer give you a positive angle on natural medicine. And that's really been shifting over the last 2 years, that access to information is disappearing.
Well, I'm just catching up on that then.
Yeah, and for me, it seems very convenient that that's all happening at the same time as this.
Well, then your film is quite a godsend, because it's an award-winning film, which is quite timely, and which needs to be you know, out there. Have you thought about theatrical? I guess we don't have theaters anymore.
No, it has gone through theatrical. It's been it's played at film festivals. It's been shown all over the world for the past 2 years.
Oh, right, of course.
We had some huge theatrical screenings in places actually like Hong Kong and Macau, where we had 1,000 people at those screenings.
My Lord.
And now it's available online. It's available on Amazon, on iTunes as well, on Google Play. And I mean, we like people to come to our website to watch it, which is watch.magicpillsmovie.com, because then we can communicate directly with you and let you know about what's going on from an advocacy perspective, which is really important for us to be able to grow that community and have people engaged with like the letter writing campaign that we just had with in the comments with the FDA. There's always something going on to promote access to natural medicine, and we need people to participate in that.
Right. Well, perhaps, so do you have a specific campaign going on now that's related to the coronavirus pandemic at all?
Right now, what we're working on is education. So letting people know how successful India has been, how successful Cuba has been. We also put together a book, or a guide rather. It's only about 20 pages long, and it's available online as well. We call it the Homeopathic Guide to 2020. We cannot make any claims legally about homeopathy being used to work with COVID. And so we don't make any claims, but we give some good and thorough advice and some introductory ideas on how homeopathy may be applicable to viruses and viral infections. And that's also at watch.magicpillsmovie.com/homeo2020, and people can download that for free. And we're making that a living document. So as we're updating, the homeopathic community has been working very closely in this time. We get together regularly. Teachers share their expertise and what they've been seeing has worked. Practitioners do as well. There's several organizations maintaining very specific databases to make sure we know how we're treating people, what's succeeding, what kind of symptoms those people had, what remedies were used, because that data is so vital. We have so much data from 1918, from the flu pandemic then. We have hundreds and thousands of cases on record where we used homeopathy. That was a time where there were homeopathic hospitals all over the world. The military used homeopathy. And we know that the mortality rate with the Spanish flu for homeopathy was 0.7%, which is very low. And actually that seems to be the case with pneumonia and homeopathy in general, where even today, allopathic medicine does not have that high a success rate in the treatment of pneumonia, of hospitalized pneumonia. So it's very important for us to keep the data, to be able to extract it later on, and to have an evidence base for what we've done in this time. But yeah, you're right. We need to. I think we need to move forward with creating a committee and really pushing here in Canada and maybe in the U.S. and other places, working with governments to at least expose them to what's out there.
Yeah, because we just did a program on what they call the lockstep. And we've just gone through stage 1, but there's a plan stage 2 and stage 3 to the plan. This is a plandemic, not a pandemic. And there's a stage 2 and a stage 3. And in that document, I don't know whether it's correct or not, whether supposedly it's a document that was released based on the secret meeting that they had in 2009 in the Rockefeller Foundation. Who knows whether it's true or not, but they keep on talking about phase 2 and phase 3, Phase 2 will be around November 2020, which is the US elections, and then stage 3. And the idea is that if people don't conform to vaccines, this is written into the document. If people don't conform to allopathic vaccines, they're going to release, on a bioweapons point of view, pathogens with an even higher mortality rate. The stage 1 COVID-19 had a very low mortality rate, which they did just to get everybody into the lockdown. But the stage 2, according to this document, they will, in the vaccine and assorted releases, will have a higher mortality rate. And then in the stage 3, if everybody goes into resistance, this document said they would release a pathogen with a 30% mortality rate. I mean, so we're dealing with maniacs if this document is correct. So that's, and I just was given that document. I did a program on it. I don't mean to be alarmist, but that's why I'm kind of pushing people.
Mm-hmm. So what happens? What happens to their plan if homeopathy works and people use it?
That's why I'm urging homeopaths such as yourself to begin to organize and begin to approach the public health authorities and say, look, we are an alternative. Approach the people, make it known to the people that you're an alternative to whatever is planned otherwise. Anyway, that's making my case.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I just see how, and you know, a lot of people think that the best thing to do is to stay under the radar so that they don't block us further.
Yeah.
And that we can continue to do our work quietly.
Yeah. Well, no, but the good thing is that you have your film, The MagicPills. So I think that just being an ambassador of that film speaks for itself.
Sorry. Water went the wrong way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's my goal. There's been people from, sorry, 1 second.
Oh.
The water just went the wrong way. Yeah, and it's been a challenge because people from my own community are very scared of the film. They're scared to draw attention to the work that we can do because the attack against homeopathy has been so strong. They asked me not to talk about cancer treatment, which we show in the film. They asked me not to talk about AIDS treatment. They wanted me to talk about things like diarrhea and ear infections and how you can use it at home, because that would be less threatening and would draw less attention to us. So there's a lot of fear. And I think that's a huge aspect of how they're controlling us and controlling the narrative, when in fact, I think we're going to have more impact and be able to reach more people if we can tell them the extent at which homeopathy has been shown to be successful clinically, scientifically, and on really, really important health issues. So yeah, I'm on that side of.
Oh, good. Good.
The warriors, I guess.
Well, tell me, is there anything or any topic that you had wanted to bring up that you haven't had a chance to bring up yet?
I think we've touched on a lot of things. Yeah, I really just want people to recognize that homeopathy isn't herbalism, isn't Chinese medicine. It's its own form of medicine. It was actually one of the more mainstream medicines, and it was shut down in the early 1900s very systematically by the American Medical Association. And we even had homeopathic hospitals here in Canada. And I just think we really need to shine a light and show, actually, I know what I wanted to talk about. There is a study that came out of Australia that is being used by governments all over the world to say that homeopathy doesn't work and we should defund it. So homeopathy was covered by the national health system in the UK until recently. It was the choice remedy of the royal family since the time of Queen Victoria. They still use it. And the reason, one of the evidence that was used against homeopathy was a study conducted by the National Health Research and Medical Council, the NHMRC of Australia. This incredibly fraudulent piece of science with methodology that was so weak that it was not accepted by peer-reviewed journals for publication, which claims to have looked at 1,800 studies and say that there is no evidence that homeopathy works in any condition, has been ripped apart. They only looked at 5 studies. Their quality standards there's never been a study that we're aware of that has had quality standards so high so as to dismiss most of the material that exists, or most of the medical studies. And they look at 5 studies and say there is no evidence that homeopathy works for any condition. Now this garbage is being used globally to say that homeopathy doesn't work. The Australian Homeopathic Association did a Freedom of Information request on this study to try to understand what was going on. And through that FOIA request, they learned that the NHMRC had commissioned a previous study, and that previous study had actually come out with positive data for homeopathy, saying there's excellent evidence in 3 conditions that it works. And that study was buried. The person who did that study was fired, and they started a whole new study headed by a known skeptic. So it's I just want to share that if people come across this, because I still hear people say, well, the science says it doesn't work. But in fact, most meta-analyses of homeopathy say it works. Most of them also say that the higher quality the studies, the more likely to be positive for homeopathy. So, you know, like everything in this area of work that we do, we have to look at what they're saying with a skeptical eye and do our own research.
Right. Very, very interesting. Well, I really appreciate both the rigor and the depth and the compassion that you bring to your work, and how you can see both sides. It's really amazing. And thank you so much for having created this and for continuing your work. And so, could you say again how people can access? We'll have all of the links there, and but how people can reach you and reach the film.
Yes, so the website, they can reach everything on MagicPillsmovie.com, but to go directly to watch the film, they can go to watch.magicpillsmovie.com. And just don't confuse it. There's another film out there that came out around the same time called The Magic Pill, which is a film about keto diet. This is very different. So just warning people not to get confused with that other film. Yeah, and they can reach me through the website as well. They'll reach me directly. And yeah, I'm interested to hear people's perspectives, and if they have ways to support us getting the film out there to a larger audience, if they want to work with us on this possible committee we're going to form, anything like that, we're open to hear from people.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Alfred. Thank you for bringing me on and introducing the topic to your audience. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Totally.